Hi, welcome to my tutorial on how to edit your traditional art in Photoshop after you scanned it in. I'm doing my little tips and tricks. Unfortunately, my first tip and or trick is to have a good scanner, which kind of sucks as advice, especially when you are watching a tutorial, but I do think it's important. I recently upgraded my scanner, and it has made a huge difference. Being able to scan with a good scanner at a high DPI, which is a dots per inch, it really does just allow you to get better texture, better colors, all that, looking better. So you have to do less work in Photoshop, and that you can do more work with it. I'm also going to be using Photoshop exclusively for this, and while I'm going to be using a bunch of different tips and tricks, I'm not really kind of explaining how to use them. I'm telling you which techniques I use and what they do without going in depth into how to use them yourself. If you see something that you think looks like it's going to be good for you, then maybe it's time to look for a different tutorial on how to use that specifically, not just watching me use it in this context. So the first thing I'm going to do is to crop the image, and I'm going to get rid of the white space that comes both from the paper, the part of the paper that I didn't draw on, and from the scanner. What I like to do is to duplicate the base. I like having that original version there for me to go back to in case I mess up, I do something, and I don't like what I've done. I just have it, it's there, and it's ready for me to duplicate again and start over. You'll see that I also try to move on to the next step while missing the step I like to do in between. So I'll try selecting some things, and it's not going to work out. And then I go back and I do on this new base layer autotone. Now, I find that autotone generally gets me the best results. It gets me the best starting off point. Auto contrast is usually pretty good, and auto color usually kind of messes everything up for me. So I like to do autotone. It worked out for this one. The color stayed pretty nice, and the contrast is upped a little. It's got a bit more pop, and I like that better. Now is when I actually start selecting things. So I look at the image and I find all the spots that just don't quite work anymore. Either they didn't work when I did them traditionally, or the scanners kind of messed them up somehow. For me, I'm going to start with the background. It's just not really giving me the right contrast that I want, particularly with the wings right on top of it. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to select the entire background. Now, usually, if I'm lucky, I can use the magic wand selection tool. This one, the background color is too dark. It's too close to the line art. It's too close to literally everything else other than his skin tone. I can't do it. So I have to go in with the lasso select. After everything's selected, I go up to Refine Edge and I both smooth and feather the selection. This keeps it from looking janky, makes it look more natural, less like I got my grubby little hands all over it. Once my selection's smoothed out, I select the group and apply a layer mask to it. This is one of those things where if you're not already familiar with it, I'm not going into a whole lot of detail. This is something to look up a tutorial about. It's super useful to know, but what it basically means is anything in this group will only affect that selection. Once my group has its layer mask, I start adding my adjustments. I like to do this with adjustment layers specifically, so that nothing's permanent and I can always go back and edit it if I find that something's too harsh or not dramatic enough. I would say that my most used adjustment layers when editing traditional art are curves, hue, saturation, and photo filter. Also color balance. That one's kind of new to me. I'm still getting a hang of it. In this one specifically, I'm using curves to play around with the brightness and or darkness of the background. I add a gradient with a layer style on it to try to make it a little bit lighter at the bottom, a little bit lighter around Ronan, and then I add a photo filter because I decide it could use a little bit of color, but not a lot. let's make it a little bit bluish. After that, it's really just kind of a rinse and repeat process. Any area that you're not happy with, you go in, select it, do a layer mask, and then add your adjustments. How long this takes and how involved it is depends on how happy you were with the original, what kind of colors your scanner isn't great with, how good your scanner is in general. This one is a fairly small piece with only really a few kind of colors and color areas, so it didn't need a whole lot from me. Now here you'll see me try to edit his eyes, but there's a little bit of a black smudge where the pen bled into the marker. I tried to just power through and edit it with curves, but I don't like it. I think it picks out the black too much, and I have to start over. My trick for this, and for any kind of bleeding outside the lines, is to use both the brush tool and the patch tool. Now the brush tool will add in the right color. You just have to kind of eye drop it and pick what you think would be about good. And then the patch tool can add back in the texture of the paper, provided your scanner is good enough to pick up the texture and that you have texture based on either your paper or your traditional medium. Once you've got that, then you can go ahead and continue with the adjustment layers that you had originally planned to do. Now that I'm almost done editing, I've looked at the piece for a long time and I realize that the background's still not quite right. And I see this little patch of background that wasn't included in my original selection, and I think should be. So I can go in and edit the layer mask for the background and make sure that that is in there. I want it in there only kind of, so I play around with the opacity of the selection and go back in and continue editing the background now that the rest of the piece has also changed. Another change that I'm making to the background is editing around the wings, giving them a little bit of glow so that they stand out against the darker background now. And that's how I edit my traditional pieces. It's maybe not for traditional art purists. There are definitely some changes that I'm making, but I'm making them so that the art looks better. And I think that's an absolutely fair and reasonable reason to use Photoshop like this. I hope you enjoyed this, found it useful, informative, interesting. Thanks for tuning in.